Chapter 27, Courting and Shouting, Late 1910s. Doing the bear. Hugging. I saw them doing the bear. Following the sinking of the Titanic in 1912 that took 500 lives, the Great War erupted in 1914 and is remembered in history as World War I. President Woodrow Wilson kept America out of the conflict until April of 1917, when he and Congress called for us to go to war against Germany. Our army was small, but young men were drafted to serve as not enough volunteers were joining. All males aged 18 to 40 were required to register to potentially be selected for military service. 4 million men were mustered, of which about half were sent to the battlefield. 100,000 men died in the war and from diseases, with 200,000 wounded. Arkansas saw over 2,000 casualties from the conflict. The only living son of Billy and Katie Harness was James Riley Harness. He registered on June 15, 1918 for the draft and reported to Fort Pike in North Little Rock, Arkansas, where he was given a discharge 6 days later and sent home. The slightly deformed foot that was noted on his draft registration kept him from military service. It made him walk with a limp, which was unacceptable for marching and combat. His grandson, Perry Harness, has suggested that he might have had a mild case of polio, which was very common in his time. Over 2 decades later, when Riley was 44 years old, he had to register for World War II, as all men 45 and under were required. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, history's deadliest, infected about a third of the world's population and killed tens of millions of people. More U.S. soldiers died from the flu than were killed in battle during WWI. The epidemic hit Camp Pike hardest about 2 to 3 months after Riley Harness was discharged. Hundreds of recruits died as the infection spread rapidly in the camp. Had Riley remained there for training, he would have been exposed to this horrible disease. Had he been accepted, he would have been sent to the war, but his limp protected him from both virus and bullets. Like Jacob, Genesis 32, who walked with a limp, he too was reminded that the God who watched over him also worked through his weakness. James Riley Harness came to know Etta Melinda Turney during that time. She resided with her father Giles Turney and mother Jody Turney, who had moved from the homestead on Turney Ridge to a farm just south of the Atlas School. Welcome home. It is possible that he had met her at some community functions held at the school. Riley was 20 years old the summer of 1918. Etta Melinda was 16 that summer. They were limited by distance and farm chores from seeing each other, except for those occasions where Riley could go to Atlas to meet her. For Riley to go up to Atlas from Bear Creek, he would have ridden up Lick Hollow Trail to a fork, where he would then take the Hornbeck Trail. That trail climbed a very steep mountain through rugged terrain and topped out at about 1,800 feet elevation. The remaining trail was flat and about 2 to 3 miles to the schoolhouse. Etta, perhaps named for Giles' sister in Alabama, lived another mile south of the schoolhouse. Her father, Giles Turney, liked the young Harness boy, but was not going to encourage them toward marriage yet. She was too young, and he wanted her help on the farm. Etta Melinda was his firstborn, and he depended on her greatly. Giles worked Etta, age 16, and her sister Dolly, age 11, like they were boys. In 1918, the 2 younger boys, Reuben and Dolphus, were only 8 and 6 years old and limited physically as workers. Their mother, Jody, was 36 years old, and Giles was 38 years old at the time. The farm operation was running well, and Giles didn't want to lose his most experienced and best hand. Both girls were using tobacco, swinging axes, and grubbing hoes with dead-eye accuracy. One day in the field, a neighbor boy named Coleman Heffley put his bare foot up on a stump, looked at Dolly, and dared her to chop off his big toe. She took it off like it was a chicken's head. He should have known not to challenge an adolescent girl who chewed tobacco. The boy was interfering with their work, and it's a good thing he only bet her with one toe. Etta Melinda, who the family called Lindy, short for Melinda, was struggling to not rebel against her father. She was not raised as a Christian by him, and increasingly it was hard to respect Giles, who was demanding of her to do more and more on the farm. Giles also drank liquor at times, and that might have added to the conflict. While Giles was respected for his hard work and farming skills, he was doing poorly at being a father and training his children spiritually and emotionally. He was probably raising his children much the same as his father had raised him. By late summer, Riley and Melinda were talking of marriage when they could see each other. It could have been the same summer in 1918 that Riley attended a brush arbor meeting held at the crossroads of the trail near where Melinda lived. A makeshift structure of poles with brush laid over the top for shade was used for open-air meetings. An itinerant preacher held daily and nightly services which were evangelistic to reach lost souls. Preachers in this area were mostly Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, and Christian Church of Christ. Reverend John H. Watts, a Methodist circuit rider in 1890, wrote about the spiritual challenges he faced while preaching in Marshall. We also preached at Marshall, the county site of Searcy County. It was a saloon town with distillery about 2 miles in the country. A very rough town. The church was weak at Marshall, only a few members, and they intimidated by the whiskey element and the Campbellites, who nearly all belonged to the whiskey side. The rough element sure dominated the community. 2 of that element got the Presbyterian pastor backed up in one corner of a store with knives drawn and cursed him out. He was a stranger in the town. They did it, I think, to intimidate him, and possibly me, too. Riley attended the brush arbor services by riding a mule up the mountain each time in the evening. At the end of each service of singing and preaching, folks were asked to come forward for prayer who needed to repent and find faith. That part of the service was called an altar call. Riley felt compelled to respond and went forward where he was instructed to pray through, an idiom for the sinner to seek God in prayer until they feel the answer. Often, the person was not given any other instructions than to seek God in prayer and to wait for the feeling that they had been heard. Riley prayed and felt the release of his burden and the joy of his discovery. At that time, there were those who were called shouting Methodists. They were verbal in their spirited praise of God during song and sermon. A handshake by those in attendance also came out of their practice of being verbal and expressive. Sometimes the zeal would make them dance and raise their hands in response to the moving of their spirit. When someone prayed through and confessed their faith and deliverance, attendees would shout in celebration. Riley said in years to come, "I almost shouted." He nearly became a shouting Methodist that day, but refrained. Benjamin F. Thomas wrote about Reverend Jesse Griffin, 1801-1883, a circuit-riding preacher. The first preacher I ever heard preach was old Uncle Jesse Griffin, who was a circuit rider and blacksmith by trade, His circuit included Wiley's Cove, Bear Creek, Calf Creek, Richland, Boston Mountain, and Archie's Fork. It took him 3 weeks to make his round and preach every day. His pay was principally corn, meat, jeans, cloth, and socks, probably some money. As long as he could go from home and back in a day, he did so, and his good old woman would hold a torchlight at night until he could lay and sharpen all the plows the neighbors brought in while he was out preaching. When not preaching, he was plowing. When harvest came on, he would roll up his sleeves, pick up the scythe cradle, and swing all day. Riley grew in his understanding of the Bible by listening and visiting with the preachers who came to his community. Etta Melinda Turney was not a Christian and chided Riley for going to such events, describing preaching as going to hear them bark. The couple was unequally yoked in spiritual matters, but Riley was compelled to marry her, and she wanted it to be soon. There was only 5 months between the time of him registering for the draft on June 15th until he acquired a marriage license on November 15th. Since Riley did not have to give military service, it set up the opportunity for him to start a future. Reflection. The new faith that Riley Harness found in God did not stop with him. In time, it impacted many who he encountered in life. The preciousness of personal faith is that it doesn't die when we do but lives well beyond us and speaks into other generations of people. This is borne out in the words of the aging Apostle Paul to young Timothy. I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. 2 Timothy 1:5. An excerpt from the Journal of Reverendus John Henry Watts, 1855-1930. Sent to Wiley's Cove, Searcy County. Reverend S. F. Dykes was our P.E. Reverend C. W. McQuan. P.E. moved us a part of the way until we met John Bratton on the way. Then we reloaded our things, and this steward taken us to the parsonage, and as usual, the pounding came in a few days with a big cloud of folks and a warm welcome. 2 small towns about 1 to 4 of a mile apart, the parsonage between them. The old-time campground on one side of the road and the parsonage on the other. Large shingle shed with camps made of lumber, streets laid off. Plenty of good water, plenty straw, and lots of old-timey shouting Methodist workers. Oh, what a time we would have each year. Lots of preachers, and they would usually take a turnabout preaching. I remember among the leading ones to camp were James Bratton, John Bratton, Francis Bratton, Clint Griffin, Jess Griffin, Dr. Ruff, Uncle Sam Leslie. Many others we haven't space to mention. We also preached at Marshall, the county settee of Searcy County. It was a saloon town with distillery about 2 miles in the country, a very rough town. The church was weak at Marshall, only a few members, and they intimidated by the whiskey element and the Campbellites, who nearly all belonged to the whiskey side. The rough element sure dominated the community. 2 of that element got the Presbyterian pastor backed up in one corner of a store with knives drawn and cursed him out. He was a stranger in the town. They did it, I think, to intimidate him, and possibly me too. So the next Sunday, I preached my first time there. So on Sunday night, after I had preached, I did not know of the circumstance, nor the preacher. The preacher rose up in the crowd, introduced himself, and related the circumstance, and said that he was afraid to fight, afraid of doing wrong. The crowd rather made light of him. The next morning they tackled me, and I told them what they could count on, so they respected me, and didn't respect him. We had a good meeting, and many of the toughs got religion and joined the church. We had a good year, many saved, finances all in very good shape, went conference wanting to move, but they would not move us. Written by Reverend John H. Watts, Methodist Circuit Rider, 1890.